Awesome. Good morning, everybody. We're going to get started. Hello, hello. First of all, congratulations, Cecile.
Thank you,
2012 Brendan Tartikoff Legacy Award honoree. It's pretty special. So join me in giving her a round.
Thank you.
So Cecile, your colleagues have said some pretty interesting things about you.
It's never going to leave me now. It's just
Well, between profiles that we've done around this award and last night's beautiful ceremony and very fun film, yeah, there were some fun things. So I want to get your reaction to some of them. So starting with Simon Cowell, who said that if a kitten and a shark had a baby, you would have come out. So, because she's cute, but then she'll bite you. Yeah. Jennifer Lopez said, she don't take nothing from nobody. And your boss, Tony Cohen, said, absolutely, you're smart and tough enough for TV. So why would people say such things about you? Why are you a shark and a kitten?
I mean, just to go back, let's start with Simon first. I mean, look, I've known him for, 10, 11 years now. And, he's very strong-willed, and, and I'm very strong-willed, and there's times when we don't agree. And when we don't agree, we don't agree, and sometimes we fall out. And sometimes he doesn't talk to me for 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
Really?
And I know I'm in the doghouse, because if I'm not in the, when we're talking, so he calls me once a day, once every few days, or he sends me text messages. And if I respond and I get no response back, then I know I've done something he didn't like, and then I'm in the doghouse for 2 or 3 weeks. And then eventually, it used to really bother me at the beginning, and now it doesn't anymore, because then eventually I get out of it. And then eventually it kind of gets better.
What kinds of things do you guys not agree on? Where do you
Well,
not
show issues.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have some big disagreements.
For example, like one type of...
It can be a casting issue, it can be a budget issue, it can be, sometimes, he's a real perfectionist, Simon, which is why he's good at what he does, and that's why he's successful, is because he is a perfectionist. But then sometimes it's fine to be a perfectionist if you put the perfection in the right place. And sometimes we disagree with where it should go.
Right.
And I think it's it's part of the process. And I've said this to him many times. The problem is when you get like him to that sort of position, you get to a place where there's very few people around you who tell you what it's really like. And there's few of us who can still do it because we've known him for a long time. And it's not always fun and it's not always comfortable, but you need to have sometimes those conversations.
Well, he made a pretty big prediction about the viewership for X Factor. Did you have a conversation with him about that?
Didn't need to.
Did he kind of know he was sort of put you guys out there?
Yeah. I mean, look, it was a really silly thing to say, and we said it. We all said, "Oh no," it was a bad thing to say.
Yeah.
But at least, when we first started talking about the show, I remember about 9 months before it launched, he called me one night and he says, Cecile, here's the thing. In American television, there's a Super Bowl that's 110 million viewers. There's American Idol that does 20 million viewers. Well, I want X Factor to be between the two. I was like, well, okay, of course you do. Of course you do. You kind of take it, you put it aside, and then you kind of carry on. But that was a silly thing to say, and he knows it. And to some extent, we all believe that. At some point, you believe your own PR. And it's never a good place to be.
Yeah.
Never a good place to be.
Do you think the fact that the show didn't achieve those numbers humbled him in a way? Has it changed the way that that dynamic, those conversations?
I think it has a little bit, but you cannot achieve what he achieves without believing in that ultimate goal, right? If you start saying, I'll be happy with 10 million viewers, then you're not going to get there. The only way you can achieve what, he's got enormous ambitions. The only way you can get there is if you do believe you're going to get that 20 or 30 million. And, Simon lives in it's like the Simon planet. And,
Simon planet.
And that planet is a very ambitious one. And again, and the beauty of the guy is he takes you on the planet. Now, sometimes when you put the phone down, you're like, wow, I just took a trip to a different place. But he takes you, but that's why he can achieve great stuff, because he takes people with him on that planet. And sometimes the planet is a little kind of out of kilter, it's not quite the right place, but most of the time it is. And I think anybody, again, who achieves that level of success always walks a fine line between genius and craziness, and you can't achieve greatness if you achieve balance. I really believe that. You can only achieve greatness if you're kind of walking that fine line.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things a lot of your colleagues have said about you too is that you manage to stay even-keeled in the midst of all of this, and yet obviously you've achieved incredible greatness as well. How do you do that? How do you balance? Where do you source that ability to, because it's not just Simon. I mean, you've got, 400 hours of television every year, right? And so many other personalities and politics and dynamics to balance. How do you kind of keep your head about it?
I'm a very grounded, just naturally. I'm just a kind of a very pretty grounded person. But I think ultimately, even the times when it got really, really crazy, and over the last 10 years, there's been a lot of those times. In the last sort of year and a half, trying to sort of walk that line between Idol and X Factor and the tensions and the politics and just creatively trying to make sure the two shows were as different as possible from each other, didn't run into each other, and that balancing act. In the end, you have to be able to just do what's right for the shows, and that's the only way to stay sane, is to sort of have your convictions in terms of what's right creatively, what's right for the business, and then sort of kind of isolate everything else as just noise and just try and kind of keep that line. Because if you do that, then people will trust you. And even when it gets very political, very sensitive, if they know that fundamentally you have the show's interest at heart, then you can get through a lot of the BS that's around it.
So what did you learn? I mean, that was a huge thing to have both of these shows, going at the same time. What did you learn in 2011 with the launch of X Factor, that you're applying now to season 2 of X Factor, season 11 of American Idol?
There's too many of these shows. I think it's, we got to play, they're all enormously successful in their own right, but I think there's definitely clutter. I always say to the development team, don't bring me another show with 3 judges and like some performers, just don't.
Right.
And then occasionally I was like, well, we don't have a performance show. I'm like, don't, there's just too many of them. So that's sort of, I think, there's a lot of clutter. But then I think more importantly, look, X Factor was a hit. It did great numbers, but it wasn't different enough. And in some ways, in strange ways, I think it was different enough from Idol, but I think The Voice and X Factor kind of ran into each other on a lot of the format aspects. And so I think our job for this next season of X Factor is to really hone in on what is specific about the X Factor and sort of, push those elements forward and try to, balance out the bits that are too similar to the other shows. So it's about making them more and more distinctive. But it's hard.
Walk me through that process. So how do you do that? How do you identify those things? Who are the conversations with? What are you doing right now, day to day, to achieve that?
Well, look, the team's just coming back because the show finishes before Christmas. So I'm actually flying to London this afternoon, and I have 2 full days with the team and Simon tomorrow, so Thursday and Friday, where we're going to go through every single aspect of the show, from how we're going to do our auditions, the look and feel of it, the storytelling, the tone, the casting, the reality aspect, the demo aspect of it, our host, our judges, what do we need to do differently, the marketing campaign. We're going to dissect every single aspect of it. And some things we'll probably resolve and some things we won't. And some things will be an ongoing dialogue. And then format-wise, we'll look at how our season was spread. And, we had issues with the scheduling because of the World Series. And we'll have those issues again. But how can we be smarter about, the scheduling of it and the breaking down of the format?
So the casting, that's all essentially up for review?
Everything, it's what we do on all our shows. When a season's over, we review everything, and it's sort of, and it's not to say we're going to make changes for the sake of changes, but you want to benefit from the experience, and we do a lot of testing, and and you take some and you leave some, but we all have our own views in terms of what worked and didn't work, and then you examine it and you look at your options, and and we'll make some changes. I'm sure we'll make some changes.
Well, there's been a lot of talk about the host and whether that worked. But as far as the judges, typically, well, on that show, you made deals for 1 year. But even if you make deals for 2 years, you can always make a change.
Yeah,
right?
there's options.
So it doesn't matter if you've got somebody sign, you can make the change. Okay, interesting.
And we may not, by the way, we may not make
Right.
changes. But the point is, we do that on all our franchises. And if you look at Got Talent as an example, we've made those castings. The judging panel has changed over the years.
Right.
It hasn't been status quo. And in some ways, it's quite a good way of approaching it. On Idol, we would never have made the change if someone had left. We would never have been brave enough. And that sort of forced us into making the change. But there's nothing to say on these shows that you have to stick with the same panel for, 5 or 6 years.
How ecstatic were you that the panel change last year with Idol worked out so beautifully?
Yeah.
I mean, how surprised were you really?
I was it's a hard one because, I was terrified, I think is a better way. I mean, I just had a really bad summer, really horrible summer. We were, the world had kind of written off the show. We were trying to find somebody to replace Simon, but there wasn't really anybody to replace Simon. So ultimately, we tried to do something completely different. When we announced it, everybody was like, oh, this isn't going to work. It's all terrible. I remember once having lunch with an investor who was looking at purchasing 19, who's our co-production partner. And he said to me, well, I'm just not going to buy the company anymore now. I was like, why? He's like, because you guys are just making really stupid decisions. I was like, okay, well, that's nice. So I said to him, well, what would you do? He's
Based on putting Jennifer
and Steven
and
together.
Steven
And I said, well, what would you do? He said, well, I would just hire people who can do the job. I was like, well, that's helpful. It's like, great, of course you would. So look, it was a tough time, and
this is interesting though, because that's a conversation I think a lot of people, in this business, there's a lot of fear and insecurity in the content business. But it sounds like you managed to have the confidence in the decisions that you made.
To be true, look, you have no choice, right? Your lead guy's gone, right? And the show must go on, so you have no choice. You gotta do something, right? And you sort of meet when those things happen. I mean, we met, I don't know how many people I met, like maybe not 100, but easily 50 or 60 potential
judges.
Yeah, judges. And so over time, even if a lot of them are not right, it gives you a better sense of what is going to be right. So with that process, you start sort of developing some kind of frameworks. And the hardest part is it's not about the individual. It's about the whole, and it's about the chemistry, and it's about the balance, and it's about all the different elements, and who's going to bring what. And the really hard part is you don't know. You can't screen test these people. You can't really audition them. You have a nice meeting with a conversation, and that's about it. So you don't know until you do that first audition, which in this case, I think it was the 28th of September in Jersey. And you walk in that room and you're like, oh my God, this could be awful. And it was okay. And then you start breathing and you're like, okay, actually, this might be all right. And then, the more we did the audition, the better it got. But then you still don't know whether it's going to work because people could just reject it. And they didn't. And it was big relief. Big relief. But I think the other part of the Idol story from last year is not just the judges. I think we had great talent. Mm-hmm. And that's the other thing when you do these shows and when you hire these judges, it's partly about their personalities on screen, but it's also about the process and their ability to pick the right contestants. And I think they did a good job last year. Good job.
So how and why did you get into this crazy business? How and why did you get into this?
How did I get into business? By complete accident.
Yeah.
I had no intention whatsoever of getting into this business originally. I just, out of business school, I joined a publishing group, Pearson, They owned The Economist, the Financial Times, and they had some small television assets that they wanted to grow, and I got moved into the TV business. And, you know, and then once you're in it, you fall in love with it, which is what happened to me.
More on the business side, right?
Initially, I was more on the business side, and then I kind of moved over. And, you know, like, truthfully, I've always loved the arts. I've always loved film. You know, I've always loved music. I've always loved the arena. But I never thought I would work in it.
Right.
And, you know, when I started working in it on the business side in television, frankly, I don't think is that interesting. I think if you're going to be in this business, where the value is added is on the creative side.
When did you kind of get that notion, get that idea? Was it pretty
Pretty
immediate?
pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty quickly.
What was one of the things one of your colleagues said, Nigel Lythgoe, an executive producer on American Idol, said, and he called it the greatest compliment that he could give, was your seamless transition from business to creative. And it is pretty unusual to have such strong chops in both sides. Tell me about that, making that transition. You know, when did you first kind of start doing the creative stuff and realizing that was your thing too?
Probably about, when did I start? Probably about 11, 12 years ago. I just, again, if you're going to be in this business, I think if you're going to be in this business, you have to be passionate about the product and you have to be passionate about the shows. And
so did you just kind of start inserting yourself?
Yeah, basically.
And so now you
and then you start giving opinions, and in the beginning, like, people don't really listen to you, and then over time they do. You know, they sort of say, oh, actually, that, you know, was a good point, or, you know, you make a change that actually works, and then people start taking you seriously.
Now you're an executive producer on Idol. Any of the other shows?
Got Talent.
Got Talent?
And X Factor.
And X Factor. From the beginning on X Factor and Got Talent, right?
And Idol too.
And Idol too.
Yeah,
Okay.
all three of them.
So talk a little bit, if you will, about that balance between executive producing, hands-on with these shows, and running FremantleMedia North America.
It's tough, and to be honest, it's getting to a point. You know, it's tough, and, you know, it's to the point that with the addition of X Factor, it's becoming practically untenable. I'm going to have to figure something out structurally, because it's, you know, now the shows are year-round,
Right.
and all these shows have auditions, which you need to travel for. You know, there's all the tape days, the rehearsals, the planning. It's a lot, and, you know, and then there's the rest of the business.
Right.
So yeah, I'm gonna have to, and look, and I'm not day to day as, you know, not, you know, Ken or Nigel or Angela Narcissus on X Factor, but, you know, but I'm very present.
Yeah, on three shows and then 400 hours total.
So
every year.
no, it's not working quite right now. The balance isn't right.
What could you do structurally? Are you thinking?
I have some ideas, yeah, but
Just-
yeah.
Can I talk about them right now?
No.
So let's go back to what Jennifer Lopez said. You haven't known her for that long. You know, Simon, we talked about, you've known for a long time, but she said you don't take nothing from nobody. She picked that up pretty quick, huh?
She's a great lady, and, you know, it's actually fun. It's one of the things that I found really nice. You know, the woman is always the minority on these shows. You know, Paula, when she was on Idol, used to always say, "Oh, it's a guy's world, and it's the boys' club, and I'm not part of the boys' club." And so I was sort of like the person she would talk to, because I was the woman, you know, and, you know, there was that thing. And sometimes with Jennifer, there's a bit of that too, because we're surrounded by these guys, and, you know, when we tape, we all have lunch together, and they're, you know, they're boys, and so there's kind of that connection that I always have with the woman on the panel, which actually is, I always enjoy.
Interesting. And then on the flip side, speaking of boys, Steven Tyler said he was immediately attracted to you.
Typical Steven. He can't help himself. But you know what? He's a rock star. What are you going to do, you know? Comes from the territory.
So originally you came from France. How often do you get back?
About twice a year.
Is that enough for you?
It's as much as I can handle, but yeah, look, I mean, when you come, you know, I'm sure other people would sort of echo this. Everybody's from somewhere, and you know, you never have roots. You never quite know, like, where actually you're from, and, you know, it's always something that people like me always struggle with. It's like, what's home? Is it the new place? Is it the old place? And it's a bit of both, and you're always a little bit in limbo.
Right.
And over time, you just get used to that feeling.
And you lived in the U.S. as a kid for a while,
Yeah,
right?
for 2.5, 3 years.
What was that like?
I loved it.
Yeah?
Absolutely loved it.
So
I
you
think that's
thought
why
maybe you
eventually I
could-
came back, because I
Yeah.
always loved it. It was a kind of a sense of freedom, I think, that I always have in this country that I don't back at home.
So, you mentioned you got into this business quite by accident. But would you recommend, to the Ceciles, the young Ceciles or Ceciles, young men and women coming out of school, would you recommend this business to them? And if so,
Again, I always say to people,
get
like,
into
A, if you want to be in this business, you shouldn't do what I did. You shouldn't do it this. You should do the other way. If you want to be in this business, you go and you just start working on a production, right?
Yeah.
And that's the way to do it. So that's what I would say. And then, if you're going to do this, don't do it for the business side. Do it for the creative side. The business side is, as I said, not very challenging, not very interesting. Well, not as interesting.
to you. Yeah,
Well, that's not where the value gets created. The value gets created in the product.
right. So let's talk about some of the other shows and other parts of the business that you run. What's your favorite part of what you're doing? Aside, I know you have a million things right now, and obviously it's getting a little crazy. But talk a little bit about the other parts of the business in addition to these huge talent competitions.
The other parts well, there's, we have 3 big daily game shows, which, are really big franchises for us, whether it's Family Feud, Price is Right, or Let's Make a Deal. Those are about, again, it's about keeping them fresh and keeping them relevant. One of the things, we did recently on Family Feud is, we put Steve Harvey in the show. And, in the space of, about 6 months, it went from a 1.8 rated show to right now it's doing like a 3.2 rating.
Yeah.
And so to sort of see how it changed like that, it kind of casting changed, and then we just tweaked the show, and we, there was a whole strategy around it. To see the effects of that is incredibly rewarding. And I just love that work, is to look at something and go, okay, it's not quite working. How do we take it to the next level? So that's, challenging and fun and interesting, and you really see the leverage, especially when you're in syndication. You really see how you can get the upside.
What do you think obviously he's got a new talk show coming up this fall, been talking about it a lot at this conference. What do you think how do you think that show will do?
The talk show?
Yeah.
I hope it'll do well.
Yeah.
I mean, I really do. I mean, first of all, although it's not my show, I
Right.
want him to succeed because he's,
Yeah.
a big piece of talent for us. And he's a great, he's a fantastic piece of talent. I mean, he's amazing, absolutely amazing. So he should, it should do okay.
Do you expect it to impact Feud's ratings? Is there sort of like an awareness factor that plays in?
Yeah, I think there totally is. Absolutely. I mean, I think it's, especially in today's world where it's so fragmented, everything cross promotes.
Right.
So that part of the business is, a really big deal for us. And those franchises have a lot of ancillary aspects to them. We now do social games on Facebook, around all those shows, all those franchises, and they all have a transactional model around them. And then that's also been really interesting. We launched a Facebook game on Feud a little bit before we did the relaunch with Steve Harvey, and we were able to cross promote between the Facebook game and the show, and we really saw, again, it's empirical, but we really saw the impact of that, and that gave us sort of new viewers for the game show. So, just thinking about how you take these brands and you exploit them in as many different medium as possible, and use those again to eventually kind of bring it back to the television franchise.
You and I have talked in the past about sort of those questions around American Idol and how to best use all the digital and ways of accessing content, balancing that with the live aspect of the show. Where are you guys at as far as thinking about what's best for Idol, X Factor, America's Got Talent, these shows that are...
We're going to do more. We did a fair amount on X Factor in terms of social media, and we're going to do a lot more this year.
But like downloading and streaming especially, I think.
Well, I mean, it's always really interesting, those debates, you know, because they're live events, and if you do that, then do you diminish the nature of the live event?
Because at this point, you can't get them downloaded the next day or next 7.
Well, this year,
this
year you will. This year
okay.
you will be able to.
Okay, as part of Fox's.
For a short window.
Okay, and that's part of Fox's deal with. Their authentication deals with distributors.
That's
okay,
right.
So that's part of that.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
And if you're not part of those, then it's 8 days later or something like that. 7 days.
No, I mean, whatever we do, we're never going to have it up for more than 7 days.
Okay.
On Idol.
Okay.
Or X Factor, and these shows, because of the live nature of it.
Right.
You don't want them to live out for too long.
But just so that I'm clear, so those decisions, you really control those decisions as opposed to Fox, right? You try to sync up with their strategy.
Ultimately, it's a dialogue that we have the network, and it's an ongoing dialogue. I mean, all of these issues, very often, they're kind of open issues, and, we think them through quite a bit. We have a lot of, conversations. We look at data, we look at numbers.
But the final call, because you own the show.
Ultimately, we own the show. Absolutely. Yeah. Ultimately, they can't do it unless the production company is on board.
Okay. So I'm sorry, is that different this year than it was last year?
We're going to do more this year. Yes.
We're
going to do more. And, and again, anything that's counted in the C3 Nielsen rating, then obviously is fine.
Right.
I mean, I think where it gets tricky is when it doesn't get counted in the Nielsen rating, and then that's when you sort of face potentially dilution issues, and you don't get the benefit of it.
Okay.
But, in a world where a lot of people TiVo the show, the environment has changed.
Okay.
A lot of people now watch it. I think it's about 15 or 20% of people who watch it, who don't watch it live anymore, who watch it, within the 3 or 7 day window.
Okay, so if I miss Idol this week, I can stream it or download it?
I don't think it's up and running yet, the service. I think Fox is putting plans in place for it, but I don't think it's ready yet.
Okay, but maybe when we get to the
maybe,
the
to be honest,
live
I'm not aware of the details, but I know it's not up and running yet.
Okay, but it will be more and sooner. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions in the audience? Yeah, come on and stand up and.
I just have 2, actually. If you look back at the last year, what are the most difficult decisions that you have to make?
That I have made in the last year.
That you find yourself continuing like, I hate having to make that decision.
Well, look, when you run a business, the bit I find the hardest is when you run a business, sometimes you have to make very hard people decisions. And I think for me, those are the hardest. When, something's not working and, you need to make a personnel change, that's tough.
Yeah.
That's never, it comes with the territory and it comes with a job, but I have a real problem. It's very hard for me, very, very hard. But, but you got to do it.
I know, yeah, I can imagine that would be very difficult. Okay, so I have heard at NATPE that game shows are needed, especially in first-run syndication. Is that true?
The game shows are needed.
Yeah.
Game shows go. Game shows. Oh, new game shows.
New game shows like Jeopardy.
What's, I guess, your feeling on the market for game shows?
For game
and
shows.
syndication?
All right. So here's my view on syndication. Again, this is just for me, for our company. I wouldn't launch a new unbranded game show in syndication. I wouldn't do it. I think I would relaunch a classic brand with a big piece of talent, but a brand new game show that has not had primetime exposure, I wouldn't do it. Because I think the market's very, again, fragmentation, very cluttered, very hard to break through with something that's not an existing brand and doesn't have a big piece of talent attached to it. I wouldn't take the risk. Feud works, but again, it's a classic brand, it's got Steve Harvey. Would I do it with another classic brand with a fantastic piece of talent? Yes. Something completely, unless, again, if you can launch something in prime time, it gets prime time exposure, you can build the brand equity, and then do it in syndication. That I would do. But straight to syndication, wouldn't do it.
Okay, thank you.
We have time for one more question.
I just have a suggestion. When you're looking for replacements for Simon, you might look at some of the talent like Anwar. Who's Anwar
You mean some former idols? Okay.
You got one more question? Okay.
Really, really fast. So I'm on the Today Show, I'm on CNN, and I host my own daily talk show on Sirius XM. So very much like Ryan Seacrest, but very different than Ryan Seacrest. My question to you is, how do I approach you or your team to get one shot at an audition to show you how I can be your best host?
We're always auditioning hosts. So you know, if I have a head of casting, and you know, you just send him your reel, and you know, at FremantleMedia, you go to the casting department, and we're always looking at new hosts. Always. I mean, that's one thing I have to say is finding great hosts is really, really difficult. So if you're a great host, you'll have a great career because you know there's not a lot of you around. Just call the switchboard and go to the casting department. Yeah.
Well, please join me in thanking Cecile Frot-Coutaz.
Thank you. Thanks so
Thank you
much.
so much.